Well, hello everyone and welcome to the video. Another one of these. Let's give every ship in Star Citizen a brief description videos. Yes, listing every ship in Star Citizen. I'm going to try and be even more brief than I was last time, because last video was nearly an hour long. We did have one really big manufacturer in it though, so today we're going to have two medium manufacturers, and we're going to try and get through them at least as fast as last time, hopefully faster. So I'm going to stop rambling and let's get right in to the two manufacturers. The first of which is going to be Crusader, and then we're going to have Constellated Outland. They're the two we're going to talk about today. So let's just jump right in and give Crusader a brief description. So, Crusader Industries. They used to be a sort of industry-only style manufacturer, but recently they've been retconned a wee bit and they have started to produce some more military-style ships in the form of the first one we'll talk about in a minute. So they are treading on RSI's toes a wee bit when it comes to the sort of more neutral side of things now, but they are still definitely leaning towards industry. They do lean towards luxury, more so than other industry specialists. So a bit more fine-tuned, a bit more stylized in appearance, whereas the other industrial stuff often is just in your face, bam, smacked, industry, wallop right to the face. No fine-tuning, just heavy duty, get the job done. Crusader were the more sort of fine-tuned, slender, stylized approach to industry. With that all said though, we're trying to keep this as brief as possible, so let's get into their first ship alphabetically, and that is the Ares. The Ares is a heavy fighter with one big massive gun. It comes in two flavours, the Ares Inferno and, what was the other one again, off the top of my head? Ion. The Ares Ion. So the Inferno is the one with the giant ballistic gun, and the Ion is the one with the giant energy gun. This is not a ship. It is a gun with a ship attached. So normally, you will have flying ships with guns attached. This is a flying gun with a ship attached, is the best way to describe it. It is one size 7 massive gun. And the idea of this is it is going to be like a really powerful ship for strafing a target, either in ground or in space. It is an attack craft, essentially. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a bomber, but it is an attack craft. Not really designed for fighting other ships. It is designed for strafing something bigger than itself and dealing out a ton of pain and damage. There used to be a difference in the shields and armour of them, but that apparently got retconned a wee bit in the recent balance patches they were doing towards components and ships, because the Ion used to have additional shields, because it had additional energy generators to power its guns and shields, whereas the Inferno had extra armor, and because it had less space because of the armor and needing to store the Daka bullets, it had less shielding and energy generation. So you could see one sort of leaned towards the sort of energy shields and energy Daka, the other sort of leaned towards physical armor and physical Daka. Whereas now it's just the guns, the main thing that differentiates the two. They've sort of been brought back to sort of even keel. Not much else I really want to say about these. I want to try and keep this as brief as possible, so we'll move on to the next ship, which will be, I need to get back down to my notes because I moved away from them. That'll be the Genesis Starliner. Forgot to add at the end there, the Ares, Ion and Inferno are being released basically as I speak. They're being released in the 3.15 cycle, which we are currently part of right now, with 3.15 just about to be released. They're coming in 3.15.1, I do believe, which is the IAE patch, which is in a couple of weeks from as I'm talking right now. So if you are watching this in more than a couple of weeks' time, they're out. If you're watching this as it's released, they're not out yet, but they are just on the other side of the peripheral door, which we are just in the middle of unlocking. And I'm rambling again. I'm trying to keep this as brief as possible. So moving on to the Genesis Starliner for real this time. The Genesis Starliner. This is the best way to describe this ship is your stereotypical airport aeroplane that takes a lot of passengers from, I don't know, London to New York in its little trip across the Earth. This is the Star Citizen equivalent of those ships. It is a passenger transport ship. So you will be able to obviously own one of these yourselves and transport passengers around as though you're an airport pilot. Or you will be able to also go to, say, you're in Stanton, but you want to take a trip to Crusader. You're at the spaceport, you jump in one of these, and it flies you all the way over there. And it will be sort of scheduled flights going from the major hubs around. So if you are a little bit strapped for cash, and you do not have your own ship in the area, this will be one way we'll be able to travel around the Star Citizen game. Is to jump in one of these, similar to flight transport in other MMOs such as World of Warcraft, except it'll be going from spaceports to spaceports, and it will obviously cost us money, and there will be scheduled flights and takeoffs and that kind of thing, and so we want to make sure we don't miss our flight, to make sure we go to the place we want to go instead of, and yeah, all the usual stuff. It's basically airports, but in Star Citizen, this is what is going to be the transportation ship. Try to keep this as brief as possible. So moving on from the Genesis Starliner, and I think it's the Hercules next. Yes, it is the Hercules series. Forgot to add, once again, Genesis Starliner not in game yet. We don't know when it's going to arrive. So it could be anything from 1 year to 5 years would be a good guess for this boy. Genesis Starliner. Moving on to the Hercules. The Hercules. Now, before I forget, these are in-game. All three forms are in-game before I forget at the end of the video again and have to add it in post. Hercules. What is the Hercules? The Hercules main job is transportation. And we'll talk about the two variants and how they change things up at the end. So the Hercules, which the base model is the M2, I'm pretty sure. No, is it C2? Yeah, C2 is the main base model, I think. And then the M2 is the military variant. And then the A2 is the bomber military variant. So C2, the civilian model, main job is transportation of cargo, mainly between space and ground. This is a pretty big cargo ship. Its main role is it's sort of fine-tuned for atmospheric flight and drops, so it is going to be really good going from like space stations down to planet. If you're doing anything other than that, because it's fine-tuned to that, it's not going to be its main goal kind of thing, so you're going to have extra expenses, as in the ship is more expensive because it's fine-tuned, so that's an extra process it needs to go through in its manufacturing and all that stuff. And that makes it slightly more expensive. Whereas if you were just going in space to space, a Caterpillar that we talked about in the previous video, Drake, has roughly the same storage capacity, yet it would do it a lot more efficiently because you don't have to spend anywhere near as much to purchase it. So it's slightly more on the expensive side for what it does, but where it really sort of takes off is when you stop transporting cargo and start transporting vehicles. This is what this ship's sort of like for this ship is. It is perfect for deploying tanks and other larger vehicles that cannot fit into other ships because they're too big, and which is where the military variants really sort of come in. Obviously, even when you're deploying tanks, it is not armoured fortress, so it's probably going to want to do it behind enemy lines. And then you get the military variant, which then has a lot more guns on the underside of the ship. So as well as deploying the tanks out, you can then take off and you can give them lots of ground support in the form of like aerial bombardments. But you've also got to note that all the guns are on the underside. So I could see this being a really sort of great sort of gameplay where all the fighters are coming in and attacking it from above, and you need to try and keep it safe so it can devastate ground targets for you. It would be a great form of gameplay, it'd be a great thing in Squadron 42. You can really see a level sort of designed around that, and great for that sort of combat where you rely on other people. So the ground people are going to rely on the M2 to keep them safe, so they're pounding the ground. And then the M2 is going to rely on fighters to keep it safe from other fighters, which are then going to rely on the ground to give them, like, keep other fighters. And you can see it's sort of this big circle. Everyone's relying on everyone, going around in circles. And yeah, that's the military variant. And then there is the A2, which loses some of its capacity, so it won't be able to deploy as many tanks, but it does gain some very, very big bombs for flying over and going boom. And that is the A2. What it does, it'll be able to fly over a target, drop off a bomb, blow up like a whole base, and then deploy a couple of tanks to then just move in and go, this area is mine because you are all dead because we bombed it with a very, very big bomb. I want to keep it brief as possible. So moving on from the Hercules to the last ship in this Crusader Industries lineup, which is actually really surprising that we got through this so fast, because Crusader really are a fan favourite, and they don't have that much ships when you think about it. So hopefully they'll have a few more. They probably do have a few more in the works soonish. So yes, moving on to the Mercury Star Runner. The Mercury Star Runner. This is a really, really big fan favourite ship. This and the Carrack are the two fan favourite ships in Star Citizen. Hands down, easy. Like the Mercury Star Runner versus the Carrack, which one's more popular? I wouldn't want to speculate, because no matter what I say, I think someone's going to get upset. But I do actually think the two are roughly even keel. I don't know which one comes out on top, but the two, Mercury Star Runner and the Carrack, are definitely the two insanely popular ships. And why is the Mercury Star Runner so popular? Because it is this game's version of the Millennium Falcon. It is the closest thing. The Constellation was the original ship that was meant to be the closest thing to the Millennium Falcon, but then they brought out this thing, and it's once again they're like, oh, it's the Millennium Falcon in space, and it looks a lot more like the Millennium Falcon in space than the Constellation does, because it's got that similar sort of silhouette. It's a lot nicer looking because it's Crusader and they're the sort of fine-tuned industrial, but the sort of smooth luxury industrial is the word I'm looking for. But yes, the Mercury Star Runner, Millennium Falcon wannabe, as well as obviously having the turrets, very similar to the Millennium Falcon. It has a good storage space, is a good jack of all trades, even has some little tunnels that you can go through similar to the Millennium Falcon's got those hiding spots underneath, so you will be able to smuggle a wee bit in it. And the main place this thing differs from the Millennium Falcon is it also has an absolute ton of computers for storing data, and it also has a really good sensor on the top for acquiring and transmitting data. So yeah, this ship's primary role is sort of jack of all trades, but leaning heavily towards data running. So even though this ship is in game, I currently have one, I can currently fly it around, only about 50% of the ship's function is there in the form of its cargo capacity and its multi sort of crew jack of all trades capacity, but the capacity it doesn't have is its cargo running, which it really needs, because at the moment it's a fun ship to be in, it's a fun ship to fly, but it is not great when it comes to its sort of defined role, and that's like data. It doesn't have its data. Like, once that is added to the game, it will be a very, very not luxurious, but very, very profitable route the ship can take. That only ships like it and the Herald that we talked about in the Drake video will be able to do, but it can't do it right now because it's not in game. And data running will really make or break this ship. It is slightly low on the gun side. There was a lot of people complaining that they didn't like how weakly gunned it is, but the Mercury Star Runner, like the Millennium Falcon, is more about being really fast, being really agile for its size, so it will be able to sort of like try and avoid fighters and sort of almost keep up with fighters, almost got that sort of fighter dexterity, which is really good for its size. Obviously, a fighter will be able to run rings around it, but compared to ships its size, it's glorious when it comes to maneuverability. Very powerful, very fast ship. The Space Millennium Falcon, not much else to say. And I'm trying not to ramble, so we're going to move on. And we're now going to talk about the other developer we wanted to talk about this time, Constellated Outland. Constellated Outland, when it comes to ships manufacturers, are the new boys on the scene. They're the guys that are relatively new lure-wise, who are wanting to prove themselves. They are, from what I can see, they're much like RSI, as in the fact that they are quite neutral and are going to try and have a finger in every pie, that sort of thing. But as they are right now, they're that new on the scene that they've currently only got one or two fingers out there, kind of thing. They look, well, they don't look like, they are obviously very heavily inspired by Tesla, the real world company, and Elon Musk. Their founder, his name is Silas Corner, is very heavily influenced by Elon Musk, and that's what he is. He's this name in the place. It's sort of mini celebrity, got his own new company, trying to be very sort of productive and have a finger in every pie. Not much else to say about them. I'm trying to keep this brief as possible, so let's try and move on and talk about their first ship alphabetically, which is the Mustang series. The Mustang series. The main rival to Aurora as the initial starter ship is the Mustang Alpha, and I suppose we'll talk about the Mustang Alpha initially, and then we'll talk about how the variants changed this up. So the Mustang Alpha, 99% of the time you're comparing the Mustang to anything, it's going to be the Aurora. It's the two little starter ships. The Mustang Alpha it's basically a fighter with some storage capacity, with some multi-role capacity. It's like 80% fighter, 20% multi-role capacity. It has bigger guns than the Aurora, so it's the more Daka orientated of the two than the base Aurora. Obviously the Aurora, you upgraded to the Legionnaire, has just as big guns and more missiles, I think, once it gets to the Legionnaire status, but I wouldn't quote me on that. There is no place to stand up, so you're just straight in and out the cockpit unless you change to one of the later ones we'll talk about later. Yeah, the Mustang Alpha. It is a series, so it's not going to be modular like the Aurora, where you can take some parts out and add some different ones in, and you'll then just basically got this whole new ship. But this is a series, not a modular ship, so if you wanted the different Mustang, you're going to have to buy a whole new ship, kind of thing. Whereas the Aurora, you want to stop flying the CL, you want to start flying the LN, well, you just take the parts out and swap it around. So there's pros and cons to that, because with the Aurora, then if you want to go back, you have to swap it back. With the Mustang, you'd have to buy the whole new ship, but then you've got both. Not much else to say than that it's entry level fighter in every way possible, and then it's got that tiny bit of multi-role capacity in the form of its storage box for transportation, and being a runabout, the handy way to write home about. As far as fighters, it is about as entry as you can get. It's civilian grade, it is everything really low. We'll talk about its variants so far. So you've got the Mustang Gamma, which has its weapons downscaled and its engines upscaled, and then it's focused primarily on racing. Then you've got the Mustang Delta, which loses its cargo capacity but increases its armor and gives it more missiles. I think there were rocket pods as well, so instead of being like lock-on traditional missiles, fire thingy one, off it goes, it's more like a barrage of small missiles in the form of the rockets. Which, if you've got, it's just different. I wouldn't say it's better or worse. It is different and requires probably a wee bit more skill, but as long as you've got that skill, it will be quite good. Because I don't think they lock on. I think they're just forward facing, kind of like your guns if you've got the non-gimbaled. So then you've got the Beta. We talked about the Gamma, that's the Delta, then you've got the Beta. And the Beta is got an actual, it's got smaller, it's got, I can't remember what it loses actually. It loses sun, it's probably the storage capacity, and the guns probably get downscaled a wee bit. And then it's got an actual space you can stand up in, and then it's got a bed, and it's got like a little walk bit. So the Beta actually might be better than the Alpha for starting, if you just wanted a true starter, just because you've got the bed, you've got an area to stand up in, and it makes it very similar to the Aurora MR, the Beta. And then it's also got more focus on sort of touring and exploring, and sort of entry, like the lowest possible entry level of exploration for you to go roaming around and see what you can find. That is the Mustang. It's a sort of jack of all trades, their sort of initial ship. They only have 2 more, I think, if I come down here. Where's my notes? After the Mustang. Yes, we're moving on to the Nomad. The Nomad is Constellated Outland's next step up, and it is considered a light freight ship in its role. If the Mustang was the basic of a car, your first car in Star Citizen kind of thing, as a starter ship, the Nomad is a truck. It is a premium starter ship, seen as a premium starter ship is by many. It's sort of like a half step up the ladder, not a full step, because I think a full step would be to something like, say, a Cutlass Black or a Freelancer. But this is sort of like a half step up the ladder, and the form is you're getting a lot more cargo capacity. You've got slightly better armor. Your guns are about the same if memory serves. Let me take a look at its weaponry here. Free size, free is the free. So it's got slightly less guns actually, I think, but it's got a lot more cargo capacity. So as well as it's got an area to stand up in, and it's got an area to sleep, as well as it's got a worktop, so you've got some space to actually live in. It is like as I said, it's basically like a truck with a tiny bit of camper van sort of vibe to it. Yeah, if the first ship was your sort of like initial truck, this is like your camper van with a little cart on the back. Not much else to say. It is great for anyone new to the game if they want something just a wee bit more than a starter ship. Yeah, it's going to be a great little trucker. Moving on to the last ship from Constellated Outland, and this is a big change. I'm expecting a lot more ships from Constellated Outland, but the first 2 were obviously very entry-level ships, the Constellated Outland testing the waters. We're now moving on to their foray into the bigger ships. Well, that's probably a good way to word it. The Pioneer. I forgot to say that the Nomad is out and in-game at the moment, as well as the Mustang, if it wasn't rather obvious from me describing them as starships and half a step up the ladder. They are both out in-game flyable and fully functionable at this point in time. So, moving on to the Pioneer. The Pioneer is the first capital-sized ship from Constellated Outland, and in the lure, it was Constellated Outland's kind of way of saying, like, we're not the little guy. We're the new guy on this scene, but we're not the little guy. We can build ships as big and as good as anyone. And that is their ship, the Pioneer. The Pioneer was the original base fabrication, base building ship. And originally, it was the only way that players were going to be able to build their own bases, their own outposts, and that sort of thing. CIG have since stated that a Pioneer will no longer be mandatory for doing these sort of things, like building your own base, but it will be extremely helpful to have one, facilitate constructing your own base and that sort of thing. They have said before as well that it is sort of like a flying factory. So you bring it to where you want to build the base, you feed it the raw resources, and then it just goes like, boom, here's your building blocks, here's your prefabricated wall parts, and then just chuck them down where you want them. Maybe this actually places them where you want them. And it's the way I sort of think of it is, have you ever seen those 3D printed buildings? This is basically the thing that comes down and 3D prints those buildings for you. Like, you just feed it the raw resources, and it goes like, here's your parts, here's your building, here's your stuff, here's your hangars, here's your refineries, here's your whatever base you're building. Even if it's just a little farm, it does it for you. It takes all the hard work out of it, and it I don't know if it automates it, but it must automate a lot of it, considering it's got a crew capacity of 4 to 8 in its description. And there is not really much else to say about this ship because it is not in-game yet, though, even though we've had no information about when it's coming, CIG have been doing a lot of work on colonies and NPC colonies, bases, buildings for Pyro. So with them working on that, they constantly keep saying that this is the stuff we're doing for the AI, and potentially in the future for player bases. So this is for like the AI outposts, but potentially player outposts too. So with them constantly just having this potentially player outposts on the horizon afterwards, after the AI ones, I wouldn't be surprised if the Pioneer comes out slightly after that. So with these NPC outposts and all that coming online with Pyro, I wouldn't be surprised if shortly after that they start working on the player ones and the Pioneer comes online at the same time. Because if they're starting to work on the features for giving us our own buildable bases, it would make sense that these two things come at the same time, kind of like how we're getting the Vulture and Salvage at the same time. It'd be stupid for them to give us Salvage, but not the Salvage ship, which is they're giving the two of them at the same time. I expect the Pioneer to come at the same time as base building, and with our base building coming shortly after their base build, the AI base building, you can see what I'm thinking. So we just really need to find out when we're getting Pyro, and then that'll give us a good idea for when we're getting base building. 4.0 is when we're getting Pyro, and we don't know where 4.0 is going to fall yet. Is it next year? Is it the year after? We don't know. It really depends on how their server meshing and a lot of the stuff is going right now, and I really don't... This is not really the right place to talk about. I'm starting to ramble. I was trying to cut as much of this rambling out, this part, as possible, but it kind of is important to try and understand when this ship is going to come. If I had to guesstimate, I'm going to guess we're going to get Pyro roughly CitizenCon next year. So Q3 next year we'll get Pyro, and I'm guessing a year after that we'll get player stuff. Player bases. So I'm guessing this ship is roughly 2 years away, and I don't see that changing that much. It really just is dependent on when those things come online. That was just all guesstimating, so definitely don't quote me on that. CIG are notorious for saying they don't do when. They just, it's ready when it's ready. And yeah, so anything other than that, I'm just guesstimating. And that has been Constellated Outland, every single ship that they have in game. I expect both Crusader and Constellated Outland to get a lot more ships over the next couple of years. I really expect them to be explored a lot more, and they'll be fitting of that. Because they're meant to be sort of medium manufacturers, not as big as RSI, but not too much smaller than RSI. So, hope you have all enjoyed this. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye. Bye.